Have you noticed that the price of basic vegetables, a gallon of milk, or just going out to lunch has steadily increased over the past few years? Have you wondered why either yourself or many others feel that their hard-earned money just isn't going as far as they wanted it to, even when they were following all the rules, working hard, and supposedly beating the cost of living? Well, if your answer to these questions is yes, then this videos, my friend, will unpack why and what you can do to make sure you don't get stuck. Every single thing I create is meant to produce the most meaningful contribution that I can deliver. I want to give people that glad-hearted certainty that comes when life is wisely navigated so that people flourish in every possible way. Welcome back, or welcome to the channel. I am Jonathan Smith, and thanks for being a part of this journey that many of us are going on to multiply and protect our wealth and impact. And today we are going to we are going to address one of, if not the greatest threat to your ability to multiply and protect your wealth, in my opinion, and that is this buzzword that is all the rage today, namely inflation. I have been talking to a lot of friends, a lot of family members and clients about this word lately. Will we have it or will we not? Will we have inflation? Will we have deflation? Will you lose your hard-earned money? Or is the US dollar a solid store of value that enables you to keep the wealth you've worked hard for and through it multiply your wealth? To be honest, I couldn't have taught inflation in simple enough terms to my fourth grader until a few years ago. The reason, well, if I have to be honest, I was relatively financially literate, like 70% of Americans are. Once I began learning from people like Robert Kiyosaki, Ray Dalio, Ramit Sethi, Dave Ramsey, just to name a few, I went down the rabbit hole of macro and microfinance and what kind of impact this has on someone like me and you. And I was completely blown away. And right now, one of the great raging debates in the finance and investing community is whether we will see high levels of inflation after our government increased the money supply this year by 30%. This year, as they injected $5 trillion into our economy via stimulus, which is also called quantitative easing, by the way, and what this will actually mean for you. And warning, I don't see it being good. So I want to have you go on a bit of a mental journey with me. Just stop and think about the following for a moment. Have you noticed, like we said at the beginning, that the price of basic things like vegetables, a gallon of milk, a juicy steak, maybe a drink at Starbucks, health insurance, education, or just going out to lunch has steadily increased over the past few years? Have your grandparents ever said to you, "I remember when I could get a pack of gum for just the cost of a nickel"? And if so, have you ever wondered why? Well, walk with me here. Price increases for everyday items like milk and vegetables and others are more obvious when they happen suddenly, like when gasoline prices spike before a hurricane or hand sanitizer spikes before COVID touchdown. However, when prices rise steadily over time, it is often accepted as normal and often, if not always, goes undetected. It's like the ancient proverb of the two fish. I'm sure you've heard of it. Two smaller fish are swimming upstream and the larger one downstream. The larger fish says to the smaller fish, "How's the water, boys?" To which they reply, "What the hell is water?" And this can be our experience with inflation. What in the world is inflation? It's like the river that we swim in every day, and yet we don't even realize what it is. You see, the phenomenon is happening for a reason, and it revolves around how our money system works. Here is a general principle to begin with. The value of money decreases when the supply of money increases. Let me say it again. The value of money decreases when the supply of money increases. Consider how the price of food and energy, water, rent, investments, and debts all are affected by an increase in the money supply. This is classically called inflation. Prices go up or inflate like a balloon, aka inflation. Let me illustrate it this way. The Super Bowl is going to happen soon, and I don't know who's going to be in it. I don't know who you're rooting for. Regardless, let's just keep with the illustration. In 1967, a cost to the Super Bowl just guess the figure. It cost $12 for a ticket. In 1977, it cost $20. In 1987, $75. In 2007, it jumped up to $700. In 2017, it jumped up to a whopping $2,500. So in about 60 years, it went from $12 to $2,500. This, my friends, is inflation. Same product. It's going up in cost every single year. And this, I believe, is extremely relevant right now, because if it's true that the value of money decreases when the supply of money increases, and we just had a 30% increase in money into our economic system, what does that mean for the hard-earned money that you now work for and possess? So is it possible that we won't see inflation? Well, those who believe we won't see inflation consistently rely on two separate yet related arguments that are important to know. And here they are. First, they point to the official consumer price index, also known as the CPI, and those inflation numbers. This is basically a way for the government to track prices for goods and services, or what they call a basket of goods and services, to maintain lifestyle. For investors, this is really important because the CPI is one of the two primary levers to know where money is going, and something that I look at often. Now, as you can see in this chart from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, CPI has been between 2.5 and 0% since 2008 and 2009. Now, the belief and subsequent claim is that despite the increased money supply conducted by the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, and our elected officials, inflation has not been prevalent in the daily lives of Americans like you and me over the last decade. Now, you can kind of extrapolate this argument to say then that there will be low levels of inflation moving forward, regardless of what the Fed does. Now, this leads to the second argument. First argument, CPI. Second argument is that the world is moving towards a more technology-enabled world, which should create a deflationary, think decrease force, or a decrease in pricing. Now, technology forces the cost of labor and production down. True, it's why you can buy a cheap burner phone for pennies on the dollar compared to the first cell phone that came out for a lot more than pennies on the dollar. And to this end, many believe that technology could potentially create a constantly decreasing impact on inflation in the eyes of those who support this argument. So according to these folks, whether the Fed chooses to print trillions or they choose to sit on their hands, inflation will remain relatively low, somewhere around 2%. Isn't a big deal. And while I acknowledge that there are some important points to each argument, I personally disagree with the conclusion. So how do I understand? How can we understand what's happening with inflation in a way that might be more accurate? Well, I think the best indicator of true inflation that I found is what's called the Chapman Index. The creator, Ed Butowski, set out to more accurately measure inflation. And here's why he did it: because he was tired of seeing a large percentage of Americans falling further and further behind in their financial lives. His initial assumption was that Americans were living their lives with the goal of beating 2% inflation, but that inflation was actually higher, therefore creating a scenario where people felt like they just couldn't keep up as they got older and felt that their money just didn't go as far, even when they were following the rules, working hard, and supposedly beating inflation. The summary from the Chapwood website is crucial to understanding the issue. It exposes why middle-class Americans, salaried workers who are given routine pay hikes, and retirees who depend on annual increases in their corporate pension and Social Security payments really can't maintain their standard of living. Why? Well, plainly and simply, the index shows that their income just can't keep up with their expenses. And it explains why they increasingly have to turn to the government for entitlements to bail them out. It's because salary and benefit increases are pegged to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which for more than a century has purported to reflect the fluctuation in prices for a typical basket of goods in American cities, but which actually hasn't done that for more than 30 years, according to many experts. So the middle class has seen its purchasing power decline dramatically in the last 3 decades, forcing more and more people to seek entitlements when their savings are gone. And as long as pay raises and benefits increases are tied to a false CPI, I believe this trend is going to continue. The myth that the CPI represents the increase in our cost of living is why the Chapwood Index was created. And what differentiates it from the CPI is simple but critically important. And here it is. The index, Chapman Index, reports that the actual price increase of the 500 items on which Americans spend their after-tax money, with no alterations, no seasonal adjustments, just real prices. And it shines a spotlight on the inaccuracies of the CPI, which is destroying, according to Ed Butowski, the economic and emotional fiber of our country. It shows our dependence on the CPI is killing our middle class, and why citizens increasingly are depending upon government entitlement and programs to bail them out. It claims to persuade Americans to become better educated consumers and to take control of their spending habits and personal finances is why it exists. Now, the inaccuracy of the CPI began, according to Ed, in 1983 during a time of rampant inflation, when the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics began to cook the books on what he said on his calculation in order to curb the increase in Social Security and federal pension payments. But the change affected more than entitlements, because increases in corporate salaries and retire benefits have traditionally been tied again to the CPI. The change affected everything. And now, 30 years later, everyone knows the long-term results. Ask anyone who relies on a salary or Social Security or a pension, and they'll tell you their annual increase in income, it doesn't come close to what their increase in expenses are. So what comes in is less than what goes out. A situation that spells disaster for the average Americans, according to Butowski. Now that we understand the issue with the CPI numbers, what exactly are the true inflation numbers in major American cities? Well, when you take a look at the data here from Chapwood, it might explain your experience better than anything else. This, my friend, is painful to look at, because the Chapwood Index shows that the average inflation over the last 5 years is between 8.1 and 12.9% in the top 10 cities. Now, that is a big difference between the 2% inflation assumptions that people make. Now, one way to think about this is if you are simply generating 8% a year in pay increase, your income is likely not keeping up with the real rate of inflation if you're in one of these major cities. And that is a major problem for the 50% of Americans who have no investable assets to produce a return, let alone a decedence, for the financial health of 50% of Americans who hold zero assets at all. And I bring this idea of true inflation versus the CPI numbers because I think it's the single most important thing that is impacting the finances of tens of millions of Americans and you as investors and people wanting to multiply and protect their wealth and impact. The continued devaluation of our currency, on the other hand, is enriching those who hold investable assets, but punishing those who simply save their wealth in cash. Savers are punished and investors are rewarded. This is one of the primary reasons I'm bullish with real estate, and even more bullish right now on Bitcoin. These two assets, along with gold and silver, some commodities, offer one of the greatest hedges against inflation right now. And it is a real situation, especially as we move into 2021, where it has been promised for more money to be printed. And there may be some extreme volatility in the short term with some of these assets that are a hedge against inflation, but over a long period of time, real estate and I believe specifically Bitcoin shine, in my opinion. They both have done, and I believe will do, an even better job of preserving purchasing power and avoiding the perils of currency devaluation. And as more people become aware of this structural advantage, I believe we will see a cascade of capital continue to flow into real estate, flow even more into things like Bitcoin, gold, and silver. And it's happening now, even as I shoot this video. My belief right now is that what looks like a speculative asset to some today, namely Bitcoin, is actually a parachute that we desperately need. It is just a matter of time until the mainstream citizen is educated on the topic. And one of the main reasons I put time into this video was to help accelerate that education. Those who understand it early and have the courage and conviction to act will be in a better position than others will. Now, here is the question. What does this mean for you? Well, here would be my encouragement. I would encourage you, I'd implore you to take the time to educate yourself on not only what is inflation and the impact of inflation, but what it means for our fiat currency, which is what the dollar is, and other fiat currencies across the globe, and what this would mean for you in terms of how you can store your wealth in assets that will not only allow you to preserve your purchasing power, but also enable you to multiply it. If you think the government is going to pump more and more stimulus into our economy, then we are going to see consumer price inflation. If you own a home or rental property, or you can purchase one now at record low interest rates, and you can lock in a 30-year at 2.5% and inflation runs at 5% or more, then guess what? The difference is going to be a transfer of wealth from the bank to you. It is nuts to think about 10% inflation levels happening in the United States. We don't need a hyperinflationary event to drive Bitcoin, real estate, or gold and silver adoption. We just simply need the status quo to continue. So folks, as I end this video, I'd implore you right now in this moment that you would educate yourself on the matters that we've talked about and look into what are assets that are going to be a reliable storage of value moving forward to provide you with that hedge against inflation so that you can keep and multiply the hard-earned money that you've worked so hard and diligently to acquire, so that not only you can live the lifestyle that you want now, but you can provide for future generations to come. And you can also avoid the trap, and you can also avoid the pain that it seems like so many people are going to experience because of this endless money printing, and many just aren't aware of the implications of it. So folks, that is it. I'd be curious, what do you think? Do you think inflation's coming, or do you think deflation is coming, and why? Comment below. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you're looking for more videos like this to help you multiply your wealth and impact, please just subscribe so that you can be notified the moment a new video drops. As always, thanks again for watching. It's an honor to participate in this journey with you. And until next video, I'll see you then. Take care.